ever feel like, there's this secret language that only language teachers speak? Like
Right.
they're all, debating inductive learning versus like
Right.
communicative competence. And you're just nodding along, like
Yeah.
pretending to understand it all.
Literally.
Well, fear no more, because in today's deep dive,
Yeah.
we are going to demystify these language teaching methods.
Absolutely.
You shared some selections from Diane Larson Freeman's book,
Yes.
Techniques and Principles in Language Teaching.
A classic.
And I have to say, this book is like a gold mine.
It really is.
It really is.
It's so fascinating.
What's so striking is how Larson Freeman takes all these different methods,
Right.
some of which might seem like ancient history now, and she makes them relevant to how we think about learning today.
Right.
Like, they still have so much to teach us.
Yeah, let's start with one that I think a lot of us probably encountered in school.
Okay.
The grammar translation method.
Yes.
It's pretty much what it sounds like,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, think back to those high school language classes.
Oh, yeah.
Hours spent hunched over textbooks,
Ugh.
translating sentences word for word,
Yes.
memorizing endless verb conjugations.
Memories.
Uh,
I can still smell those dusty textbooks.
I know exactly what you mean.
But how effective was that, really? I mean, in terms of actually speaking the language?
Oh, that's the question, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, the grammar translation method really prioritizes reading and writing.
Okay.
It places literary language on a pedestal.
I see.
Spoken language, not so much.
So the goal is more about like
Yeah.
unlocking the secrets of literature
Yeah.
than, let's say, ordering a coffee
Right.
in a foreign country.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
But I think it's worth noting that
Yeah.
even though it has limitations, this method can still be useful in certain contexts.
Okay.
For example, it can be really good for building a solid foundation in grammar
Yeah.
and vocabulary.
Okay.
And some people might find that this approach helps them to really appreciate the nuances of the language's literature.
Yeah. It's a good reminder that there isn't like a one-size-fits-all
Right.
approach to language learning.
Exactly.
Okay. Let's shift gears to something that feels a bit more,
Oh.
well, lively. The direct method.
The direct method. All right.
Yeah.
So with the direct method, you're essentially stepping into a world where the target language reigns supreme.
Okay.
Imagine a classroom that's buzzing with activity.
Yeah.
The teacher's using gestures and visuals and real, actual objects
Oh, wow.
to bring the language to life.
So instead of translating apple from a list,
Yeah.
you're holding an actual apple.
Right. Yeah.
And learning its name in the target language.
That's the idea.
Oh,
It's all about making those direct connections between meaning and the target language without relying on translation.
I can see how that would be a lot more engaging
Right.
and intuitive for sure.
And it's fascinating how the direct method emerged as a reaction against that grammar translation approach.
Totally.
It's almost like a pendulum swing from one end of the spectrum to the other.
Yeah.
And one of the core principles of the direct method
Yeah.
is inductive learning.
Okay.
So you're not explicitly taught grammar rules.
Gotcha.
Instead, you're immersed in the language and encouraged to discover those
Yeah.
rules through experience.
So less memorization and more hands-on learning.
Exactly.
That sounds refreshing.
Yeah.
Although I have to admit, I might feel a little lost
Okay.
without those grammar rules as a crutch.
Well, that's where the teacher's role becomes really crucial. They guide you through the process.
Yeah.
They provide feedback. They scaffold your learning.
I see.
With techniques like question answer exercises,
Yeah.
sentence completion,
Right.
and of course conversation practice
Yeah.
are all designed to help you internalize the language naturally.
It makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of practice,
Okay.
our next method takes that concept to a whole new level.
All right.
The audiolingual method.
The audiolingual method.
Yeah.
So this one is all about drilling those language patterns
Oh.
until they become second nature.
Okay.
It's rooted in behaviorism. So think repetition reinforcement and habit formation.
So instead of analyzing grammatical structures, I'm just repeating phrases and dialogues over and over.
Exactly.
Okay.
Picture yourself in a language lab, headphones on, diligently working through those drills,
Yeah.
mastering pronunciation and intonation.
Okay. I have to admit, that sounds a little intense.
Yeah.
Maybe even a bit monotonous.
It can be.
But I can see how it could be effective, especially for building fluency and accuracy.
Yeah, the audiolingual method definitely has its critics,
Okay.
but it also highlights a really key aspect of language learning that we often overlook,
And what's that?
the importance of repetition and practice.
That's true.
Yeah.
It's like learning to play a musical instrument. You don't just read about the notes.
Right.
You have to physically practice those finger movements.
Exactly.
Until they become automatic.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah. And speaking of shaking things up,
Right.
let's talk about a method that takes a completely different approach.
All right. I'm listening.
The silent way.
The silent way.
Ooh, I'm intrigued, but also slightly terrified.
Yeah.
Does this mean I have to learn a language without making a single sound?
Not exactly.
Okay.
But it does involve a lot more silence from the teacher
Okay.
than you might expect.
Interesting.
The teacher acts more as a facilitator, using tools like colorful rods and charts to guide your learning.
Huh.
You're the one doing the talking,
Oh, wow.
making the discoveries and building your understanding of the language.
So it's almost like a puzzle that you have to solve
Yes,
using language as the key.
exactly.
That sounds both challenging and empowering
It is.
at the same time.
The silent way really flips the script on traditional teaching methods.
Right.
It's based on the principle that learning is most effective when it's active
Mm-hmm.
and self-directed.
And I imagine those moments of silence from the teacher
Yes.
can be pretty powerful.
It
It forces you to think, problem solve,
Yeah.
and really engage with the language.
It's all about pushing you to take ownership of your learning,
Yeah.
which can be a bit daunting at first,
Right.
but ultimately it leads to a deeper understanding
Yeah.
and retention.
It makes sense.
Yeah. And speaking of stepping outside your comfort zone,
Okay, here we go.
our next method embraces a touch of the theatrical,
Ooh.
desuggestopedia.
Desuggestopedia.
Yes.
Now, this one sounds intriguing.
Okay.
I'm picturing myself learning a language while lounging on a plush sofa,
All right.
listening to soothing music.
Well, you're not far off.
Okay.
Desuggestopedia is all about creating a relaxed and positive learning environment to help overcome psychological barriers
I see.
and unlock your learning potential.
Interesting.
Think soft lighting, comfortable seating,
Yeah.
and yes, even classical music playing in the background.
So it's like a spa for the language learning mind.
Exactly.
I love it.
Yeah.
I'm curious, though,
Yeah.
how does this actually translate into language instruction?
So imagine this. You're presented with a dialogue in the target language,
Okay.
but it's not just dry text on a page.
Right.
It's accompanied by beautiful imagery,
Wow.
perhaps even set to a piece of classical music.
Okay.
The idea is to engage your senses
Yeah.
and create a positive association with the language.
It almost sounds like you're being hypnotized into learning the language.
Not quite hypnotized,
Okay.
but the principle is similar.
Gotcha.
Desuggestopedia believes that we learn best when we're relaxed,
Yeah.
receptive, and our subconscious mind is engaged.
Interesting.
It's fascinating how this method challenges traditional notions
Right.
of the classroom environment and that teacher-student dynamic.
It really is. And that's what's so exciting about exploring these different methods.
Absolutely.
It really opens your mind to the diverse ways we can approach language learning.
It does. And this next method we're diving into really leans into that idea of creating a positive and supportive learning environment. Community language learning.
Community language learning.
Yes,
The name itself gives away the game, doesn't it?
I think so. This method is all about fostering a sense of community and trust
Okay.
among learners, with the teacher acting more as a counselor or facilitator.
So less about lecturing from the front of the classroom
Yeah,
and more about creating a space for genuine interaction.
exactly. Imagine a circle of students perhaps seated on the floor
Okay.
with the teacher in the center. The atmosphere is relaxed,
Yeah.
informal, almost like a therapy group.
Interesting. How does the actual language instruction happen in this setting?
Well, a student might whisper what they want to say in English to the teacher,
Okay.
who then helps them to express it in the target language.
Oh,
This exchange is recorded, transcribed, and later used
okay.
for further practice and analysis.
I like how this approach acknowledges the affective side of language learning, the emotions, the anxieties,
Yeah.
the inhibitions that can sometimes get in the way.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And by creating this safe and supportive environment,
Yeah.
community language learning aims to empower learners to take risks
Okay.
and gradually build their confidence.
That makes sense. All right, let's move on to a method that, at least in name, seems to be the polar opposite of
Sure.
sitting in a circle, having a heartfelt conversation.
Right.
Total physical response, or TPR.
TPR. This one is all about getting your body involved
Okay.
in the learning process, think Simon Says,
Mm-hmm.
but with the goal of mastering a new language.
So instead of conjugating verbs on a worksheet,
Yeah.
I'm jumping, pointing, and maybe even doing a little dance.
You got it. The teacher gives commands in the target language.
Okay.
Stand up, walk to the window, touch your nose, and the students respond by performing those actions.
Okay. I have to admit, that sounds like fun.
Right. It's a lot more active.
And I could see how it would be especially effective for kinesthetic learners who learn best through movement.
Yes.
Yes.
It definitely taps into that mind-body connection.
Right.
And it's a great way to introduce new vocabulary and internalize grammatical structures in a way that's both engaging and memorable.
For sure. It's a good reminder that language learning doesn't have to be confined to textbooks and lectures. Now, let's talk about a method that's perhaps the most well-known and widely practiced today.
Right.
Communicative language teaching, or CLT.
Is CLT. It's a bit of a game changer, I think.
What do you mean?
It really shifted the focus of language teaching away from grammatical accuracy and towards communicative competence.
So in other words, it's not just about knowing the rules.
Right.
It's about knowing how to use the language effectively in real-world situations.
Yes, fluency and the ability to convey meaning take center stage here.
Gotcha. So less emphasis on perfect grammar and more on getting your message across, even if it's a little messy.
Exactly. Think role-playing a conversation at a restaurant.
Okay.
Giving a presentation.
Yeah.
Negotiating a deal.
Yeah.
Tasks that require you to use the language in a functional and meaningful way.
It sounds like CLT acknowledges that communication is rarely perfect.
Right.
Especially in real-life situations.
Absolutely.
Where there's noise and distractions and unexpected turns of phrase.
It does. And it embraces those imperfections, encouraging learners to take risks, experiment with the language, and focus on getting their message across.
That's a refreshing perspective.
Yeah.
It takes the pressure off perfection
Yeah.
and allows learners to focus on the joy of actually communicating. Now, let's move on to a cluster of approaches that really resonate with me.
Right.
Content-based, task-based, and participatory approaches.
These approaches are all about making language learning relevant and engaging by connecting it to meaningful content and real-world tasks.
So instead of learning grammar in isolation, I might be learning it while studying a subject I'm passionate about.
Exactly.
Like history or science or even art.
Precisely. Imagine a classroom where students are learning about climate change. Not just from a textbook, but through articles, documentaries, even guest speakers, all in the target language.
That sounds amazing. It's a win-win situation. You're expanding your knowledge base and improving your language skills simultaneously.
And by working on tasks and projects related to that content, learners are not only developing their language proficiency, they're also developing critical thinking skills, collaboration skills, and a deeper understanding of the world around them.
It's such a holistic approach.
Okay.
All right, let's shift gears one last time.
Okay.
And explore a set of approaches that focus less on specific methods and more on equipping learners with the tools and strategies they need to become successful language learners. I'm talking about learning strategical training, cooperative learning, and multiple intelligences.
These are, as you said, less about what we teach and more about how we learn.
So it's about helping learners become more metacognitive.
Exactly.
More aware of their own learning processes and strengths.
Yes. Learning strategy training might involve teaching students techniques like think aloud, where they verbalize their thought process while reading.
I see.
Or mnemonics for remembering vocabulary. Cooperative learning emphasizes teamwork and collaboration, while multiple intelligences activities tap into learners' diverse strengths. Whether they're visual learners, kinesthetic learners, or perhaps musical learners.
I love that these approaches empower learners to take ownership of their learning. It's like giving them a toolbox full of strategies and encouraging them to find the ones that work best for them.
And by doing so, we're not only helping them become more effective language learners, we're also helping them develop lifelong learning skills that they can apply to any subject or field.
That's so important. Now, as we've been discussing these various methods, I've noticed a recurring theme: the evolving role of the teacher. We see a shift from the teacher as the sage on the stage to the teacher as a facilitator, a guide, a co-learner even.
So that's a great observation.
Yeah.
And it reflects a broader shift in our understanding of learning.
I think so.
A move away from the idea of the teacher as the sole possessor of knowledge towards a more learner-centered approach, where the teacher creates the conditions for learning to happen.
So the teacher becomes less of a lecturer and more of a coach.
That's a good analogy.
Guiding students on their individual learning journeys.
And it aligns with the principles of many of the methods we've discussed today.
Yeah.
From the Silent Way's emphasis on learner autonomy to the focus on communicative tasks and real-world application in CLT.
It's a reminder that the most effective learning happens when students are actively engaged, motivated, and feel a sense of ownership over their learning.
Yeah.
Now, another key theme that emerged from our deep dive is the importance of context. Larson Freeman emphasizes that there's no one right method, but rather the best approach will depend on a whole host of factors.
Yes.
The learner's age, their goals, the cultural context, and so on.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's a reminder that teaching, like learning, is not a one-size-fits-all endeavor.
Totally.
It requires careful consideration of the learners, the learning environment, and the specific goals of the instruction.
So it's about being adaptable, responsive, and willing to experiment with different approaches to find what works best in a given situation.
I think that's a really important point.
Now, as we move towards the final stretch of our exploration, I want to touch on something that really resonated with me in Larson Freeman's introduction. She talks about this idea of a doubting game and believing game when it comes to approaching different language teaching methods.
That's such a powerful concept.
Yeah.
I think what Larson Freeman is getting at is the importance of approaching these methods with both a critical eye and an open mind.
Right.
It's about being willing to question assumptions, challenge the status quo.
Totally.
And experiment with different approaches to see what works.
It's like she's saying, don't just take my word for it.
Exactly.
Try these methods out. See what resonates with you.
Yeah.
Adapt them to fit your context and the needs of your students.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's about being a reflective practitioner, constantly learning and growing and never being afraid to try something new.
I love that. It's about finding that sweet spot between being informed by research and being responsive to the ever-changing needs of our learners.
It is. And it's a journey, not a destination.
Right.
There's always more to learn, more to explore, and more to discover in the world of language teaching. It really is. It makes me think about something Larson Freeman touches on in her conclusion.
Okay.
This idea that the choice of a language teaching method isn't just a pedagogical decision, but a political one as well.
That's pretty thought-provoking.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's a crucial point that we often overlook.
Yeah.
The way we teach language is inherently intertwined with those broader social and political contexts.
Okay.
The methods we choose, the materials we use, the varieties of language we prioritize.
Right.
They all reflect certain values and ideologies.
Oh, wow.
Whether we're conscious of it or not.
So it's not just about teaching vocabulary and grammar.
Right.
It's also about shaping learners' understanding of the world.
Exactly.
And their place in it.
Precisely. Oh. And that means we need to be critically aware of the potential impact of our choices as teachers.
It sounds like a lot of responsibility.
It is. We need to ask ourselves, whose voices are represented in our materials?
Yeah.
Whose cultures and perspectives are we prioritizing?
Right.
Are we creating truly inclusive and equitable learning environments?
That's a powerful reminder that language teaching carries a responsibility that goes far beyond simply imparting linguistic knowledge.
It does. And it speaks to the need for ongoing reflection and critical engagement with our own practices as teachers.
I agree.
Yeah.
Now, shifting gears a bit, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on Larson Freeman's discussion of the tension between theory and practice in language teaching.
Yeah.
It's something I think many teachers grapple with. It is. It's that age-old gap between what's discussed in academic journals and what actually plays out in the messy, unpredictable reality of the classroom.
Exactly.
And while research and theory are essential for informing our practice, we also need to be able to translate those ideas into practical application that work for our students and our teaching contexts. So it's about being those reflective practitioners we talked about earlier.
Yes.
Constantly observing, experimenting, and adapting our approaches based on what we're seeing in the classroom. Absolutely. The best teachers are those who are lifelong learners themselves, who are open to new ideas and approaches, and who aren't afraid to try new things, even if it means stepping outside their comfort zones.
Makes sense.
They see theory and practice not as separate entities, but as two sides of the same coin. I love that. It's about finding that sweet spot between being informed by research and being responsive to the ever-changing needs of our learners.
It's a balancing act for sure.
As we wrap up our deep dive into Larson Freeman's book,
okay,
are there any key takeaways or insights that you'd like our listener to walk away with today?
Well, if I had to choose one, it would be this. Remember that language teaching is about so much more than just transmitting knowledge.
Okay.
It's about creating experiences that spark curiosity, foster creativity, and empower learners to become confident communicators and engaged citizens of the world.
It's about making language learning come alive.
Exactly.
Not just in the classroom, but in the real world.
And as we move further into the 21st century, I think it's essential that language teaching embraces the diversity of learners, harnesses the power of technology, and cultivates a sense of global citizenship.
That's a vision I can get behind. It sounds like there's a lot of exciting potential for innovation.
There is.
In the field of language teaching.
And I think we're only just beginning to tap into what's possible.
Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into the world of language teaching methods.
It's been a journey.
It has been an incredible journey, exploring a wide spectrum of approaches and uncovering some truly fascinating insights.
I hope our deep dive has not only shed light on these various methods, but has also encouraged our listener to think critically about their own beliefs, about language learning and teaching.
Because ultimately, there's no one right way to learn or teach a language.
Exactly.
The key is to be open-minded, curious, and willing to experiment.
To embrace the joy of discovery, the messiness of the process.
I like that.
And the endless possibilities that language learning offers.
Beautifully said. And on that note, we'll bid farewell.
Farewell.
Happy language learning, everyone.